Psalm 146. That's kind of where we're going to hang out today, you might say. If you don't read the Psalms, I would suggest you read the Psalms. They're very encouraging. They're very uplifting. They're very spiritual and help you to be that way as well. There's a pilot. He's having difficulty landing his little plane. The runway below was covered with fog. And so the guys at in the tower, they decided they were going to help him land using radar. As the pilot received the instructions from them, he suddenly remembered a tall post that was directly in his way for landing. It was there. And so he, with panic, radioed the tower. And he received a blunt reply. You obey instructions and we'll take care of all the obstructions. You know, for some of us, for a lot of us, it's hard to give up trust, to trust in someone. You know, I don't like flying, and all of you know that. And I think probably the reason I'd like to drive 3 days in a vehicle versus fly for 4 hours in a plane is because I don't trust the pilot. I don't know the guy. I don't know who I've just put my life in his hands. And so it's hard. And so the question arises quite often from people as I talk to them, who can I trust? And if you think about it, who can you trust? I mean, look at the authorities that we have in this world. The Prime Minister, he'll tell you anything you want to hear so that he can do whatever he wants to do. Not what he's elected for, but what he wants to do. You know, all the greed and all the hunger for power and influence and the lying and the cheating that you hear going on in places of authority, it leaves you bewildered. Like, who do you trust in? You read about the police and the corrupt policemen, and you read about the corrupt judges and all of those things. And then you look at the criminals and they say they got more protection than the victims. And you say, who can I trust? And you know, it's not that different from Bible times. It was the same then. We live in the information age. And we can get information on anything at the tip of our fingers. All you have to do is type it in on the internet and boom, you got more information than you can possibly handle. But can you trust the information? There's so many biases and prejudices out there and scams. And do you trust that information? And so trust becomes a serious issue. And I hear people saying, who do I trust in? Who can I trust? What can I trust? Well, if you listen to the psalmist, I think you can find the answers to that question. The psalmist says it rather plainly to us. He states it quite clearly. And I think the reason he does is because he struggled with that very same question in his day and age. This Psalm 146, is one of the last 5 Psalms. And those Psalms are kind of grouped together sometimes and called the praise Psalms. Because everyone starts with praise the Lord. And so praise him in the heavens. Praise him in his sanctuary. It's good to praise the Lord. Sing a new song to him. All of those things are in there. And this psalmist is writing this psalm based on his experience in life, in his life. And he was probably asking himself the same question. Who can I trust? Now, you got to understand that he knows the history of Israel. He knows all the victories they had in the wars and the losses they had in the wars and how God delivered them from Egypt and all of those things. He understands all of that when he writes this psalm. He understood because he heard from the prophets, like the prophet Isaiah, who warned the people in chapter 31 and verse 1, said, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots because there are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but don't look to the Holy One of Israel or consult the Lord. You think they had trouble back then too? Absolutely. Israel was in a bind because the Syrian king was coming down on them. And God, through the prophet, told them, sit still. Don't stress about it. And they were stressing about it. And so they took matters into their own hands and they made alliances with Egypt because they had the chariots and the horses. And Egypt was all too willing to help them for a price. And the result was Israel, all of those that went to Israel for protection died. Because they didn't go to God. And so the psalmist writes and he says, don't put your trust in princes. It's a warning. You see, Israel tried to put their trust in the princes of Egypt. But no matter what Egypt gave, or Israel gave Egypt, no matter what Egypt could do physically for Israel, with all their chariots, with all their horsemen, they were no match for God. And besides, God's will is going to happen. Now you think about this. All of the experiences they had with God, and they say, no, we're going to trust Egypt and their horses and their chariots. Well, it didn't work out so well for them. And the psalmist says, don't trust them because there is no salvation found in their hand. You know, people want to trust people today, and they put their trust in the prime minister or the president or Trump or Trudeau, or they put their trust in all kinds of things. They put their trust in money. They put their trust in investments, all of those things. But we're not supposed to put our trust in those things. And we best be warned by the psalmist. Putting trust in people, putting trust in these things in this world is vain. It's not going to help. And the psalmist says, here's why. When they quit breathing, the princes of this world, the Trumps, the Trudeaus, whoever, when they quit breathing, like anyone, they die, they return to the earth, and all of their plans with them. They die. They can't even save themselves. Why trust in them to save you? Israel looked to Egypt, but they still had a problem with God. And Egypt couldn't help them with that problem. Egypt could do nothing for that problem that they had. You and I may seek help from people in this world, but remember, our biggest problem is with God. Unless you are in his family and you are living to his glory and honor. Our biggest problem is with God, and no one in this world can help us with that. So don't put your trust in things in this world. And like David mentioned this morning, if he's looking after everything, why worry about it? Let him take care of things. Whatever man claims he can do, just remember this. He dies just like you. And then he can do nothing. He can't save himself and he can't save you. So that still leaves us with the question, who do I trust in? Who can I trust? So when someone asks you that question, what do you answer? Do you give them? What do you tell them? Well, who do you put your trust in? I guess that's even a better question. See, the psalmist said, blessed is he whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God. He's talking about the God of Israel. He's talking about the living God. He's talking about the God that lives in heaven as opposed to the idols of man. That's who he's talking about. You know, sometimes I think it'd be great to just sit down and have a coffee and discussion with somebody like Elijah or Elisha, one of the prophets, maybe King David. You know, they talked to God, and so you want to talk to them about their experience, right? Like Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 6. He's in the city of Dothan, and he's down there, and Syria is ticked. In fact, the Syrian king thinks he's got a spy in his midst, because everything that he goes to do, they already know. Well, it happens to be Elisha, by the power of God, that reveals everything he's going to do. And so someone in his army says, Your Honor, there's no one in this army that's betraying you. There's a prophet of God in the city of Dothan. And he says, go, surround that city, and you take him captive. And so the servant of Elisha gets up in the morning, and he sees all of the Syrian army around the city. And he says, alas, master, what must we do? What are we going to do, man? Like, this is panic time, serious panic time. And Elisha says, don't be afraid. In our language today, he might say, don't sweat it. He said, the army with me is much more than the things that are with them. And I'm sure his worker there that's working with him is going, are you kidding me? I don't see anything, right? And so Elisha says, Lord, open his eyes so he can see. And he sees horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And Elisha says, you see, it's not a problem. That's the Lord's army. That's just man out there. I've got the Lord's army around me. I have nothing to fear. See, sometimes I don't think we trust that enough. When he says, I walk with you, I watch over you, I sustain you, we don't trust that enough because we don't see it. But the Lord's army's around you. You're okay. And whatever befalls you, it doesn't matter. Because you're with him. It's victory. Whether you die or live here, it's victory in him. And so his eyes were opened. And he says, see, we're on the right team. Trust the Lord. And he said, if that isn't enough, think about this. He's the creator. Consider this. How many men have done anything even close to creating a universe? And creating the sea, he mentions in there. And the creatures in the sea. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever watched one of those shows and it shows all the tiny little creatures in the sea, all the different designs, and there's probably millions of them. I don't know, like there's thousands upon thousands of them. And he designed them all, created them all, and for a specific purpose. Have you ever seen any man do that? No, he's the creator. He's made you and I. He's designed us. So we are who we are. There's nothing that compared to him. So, you know what? Guys like Elisha, Elijah, Abraham, they all put their trust in him. And they gained the victory, the creator. And if that's not enough, all that might of creating things and all of that, he says, he's the keeper of faith. He doesn't just say he's faithful. He says he is faith. He's faith personified. He is faithful because he's the keeper of faith. He is the origin of faith. In Romans, Paul is dealing with the Jewish problem that they had. And the Jewish problem was that God was now saving the Gentiles. And that is that is going against his promise to them and his covenant to them. And they're having a huge issue with that. And Paul says, hold on, whoa. He said, it's never been about being a Jew physically. He said, it's a matter of the heart. It's being a Jew inwardly that matters. The circumcision of the heart, not the circumcision of the flesh. And in Romans 3:3, Paul poses the question. Therefore, if some of those Jews were unfaithful, does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? Of course, the answer, you and I know, is not. Of course not. It doesn't do that. Let God be true, and that's what Paul says. Let God be true, even if everyone else is a liar. God is true. And Paul says a similar thing in 2 Timothy 2:13. He says, if we are faithless, God remains faithful because he cannot deny himself. He is faith personified. And so he says, look at God. This is who you should put your trust in. The one that can deliver you, the one or the one that you can hope in, the God of Israel. He's the creator and the faithful God. That's the one to put your trust in. You don't put your trust in something that isn't faithful. And so that's the answer. And people say, okay, I get that, but why? Why should I? Well, why shouldn't you? And he gives us a list in the 146th Psalm. He says, he is justice. God is the one that presides with justice over everyone and everything. Everyone will give an account to him. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. You see, in our world and our legal system, we have a tough time trusting that. Because sometimes it seems like it protects the criminal more than the victim. But with God, justice is executed. He is just. That's a good reason. But he says, but he also is the God that sustains us. He gives food to the hungry. I like the way Jesus says it in Matthew chapter 6. He says, don't be anxious about anything. You see the lilies out there in all of their glory? Not even Solomon with clothes as well as they are. And if God clothes them with that glory and he looks after them and they grow, they get the sustenance they need. He said, what are you worrying about food that you're going to eat? Or what are you worrying about the clothing that you're going to wear? He says, you don't have to worry about it. It's God that's looking after you. And then, of course, the end of that is seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. You'll have all of that. That's what it's about. But he sustains because he is able to sustain. And he also delivers. He sets prisoners free. And I talked to a guy one time about this, and he said, you mean if I was in jail, he'd just free me? And I said, no, that's not what the psalmist is talking about. The psalmist isn't talking about freeing the criminal from behind bars. What the psalmist is talking about is being freed from being imprisoned by sin, by Satan and by sin. And he says, he sets you free from that. He gives you hope, a life which you can be with him, in which you can be with him. He loosens the restraints of sin. He forgives you. He cleanses you with his blood. And you're free to serve him without guilt, without the penalty of sin. So he delivers. God's the only one that can do that. No man's going to do that for you. I guarantee you. He opens eyes. Remember what Jesus said to the Pharisees? Talking about the blind leading the blind. He said, seeing they're blind and having ears they don't hear. He's not talking about having everybody that is physically blind being able to see. That would be wonderful. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about being able to see spiritually. God's the one that opens eyes. If you seek him out, he'll open your eyes to everything that he is and everything that he has for you. The Pharisees didn't want it. He exalts. How many times have we seen somebody exalt themselves? And most times it ends up in failure at some point. But God's the one that exalts. And he's not talking. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, you mean he exalts all the lowly? And he was going to go out on the street and live on the street and be lowly. That's not what he's talking about. The word here is the one that is humble. You see, God's going to exalt the humble, the one that bows his heart before God and knows his position before God. He will exalt that person in due time. James says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. And so he's the one that exalts. And he loves righteousness. In Psalm 11 and verse 7, David says, for the Lord is righteous, and he loves righteous deeds. The upright, or the righteous, shall behold or shall see his face. You see, God, again, is the embodiment of righteousness. He himself is pure righteousness. And he loves righteous deeds. So it only makes sense. He loves the righteous. That's just his nature. That's his character. And he says, and he watches over. God is the one that's taking care of things. Can you think of someone that would be a better guardian of your soul than God? I can't. I mean, he created it. He knows what's best for it. And he knows what to guard it against, doesn't he? And so he's our guardian. He can protect where nothing else can protect. Do you know, there isn't anything that worries God that comes up against him. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how powerful we think it is. To him, it's peanuts. It's nothing. And so he's our guardian. He'll look after us. He can do it. But ruin comes to those who deny him. And then last of all, kind of like to put the spike in to finish it up, he says, as we're wrapping up here, one last point. This God, that the reason you should put your trust in him is because he reigns eternal. I don't know about you, but do you know anyone else that's eternal? I don't. There isn't a man, a woman, a child in this world that is eternal. Only God. You know, people reign. Oh, there's all kinds of people reigning over nations and everything. And they are reigning because God allows them to reign. But they don't reign eternal. Only God reigns eternal. Everything else is temporary. And so he says, that's a good reason to put your trust in God. And so the psalmist gives us a list here. And it's a fairly complete list for all the reasons why we should put our trust in God. So why do so few people put their trust in God? Because you and I still have to make the choice. You see, too often we're like the pilot of that little plane. We get so focused on the obstacles that we forget to listen to the instructions. And we start making up things like what ifs. What if there's a war? What if the Muslims take over? What if the stock market crashes? What if I didn't save enough money for retirement? What if I get in an accident? What if? And we try in every detail possible to make all of our plans. And just like Israel, we forget to consult the Lord. And that's really what Jesus was saying in Matthew 6. He says, don't be anxious, consult the Lord. He's taking care of it all. And so, but we do that because it's a challenge. It's a challenge to give your trust up. But I can tell you there's no one else to trust in but God. You know, we got to learn from the godly men of ages past that there's no value, there's no point in trusting in mankind. And just in case you're wondering, that includes trusting in you and your own ability. I mean, God's given us abilities, we ought to use them. But trusting in them is a different story. So it's difficult to give up trust. But with God, it's worth it. So what's the message we learn from this? Well, just like the tower told the pilot in the little plane, if you want to land safely and you want to be alive when you land, then obey the instructions and let us take care of the obstructions. And God gives us basically the same message. He says, if you want to land safely in heaven and have eternal life with Him, then trust Him, obey His instructions, and He'll take care of all the obstructions. And all will be well. If we can serve you this morning in any way, if you have a need that we can help you meet, we want to do that. We want to serve you. So we invite you at this point to come forward as we stand and sing.
Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested, though in the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. So cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine, and we'll understand it, yes, all by and by. Faithful till death, said our loving Master, a few more days to labor and wait. Toils of the road will then seem as nothing as we sweep through the beautiful gate. Farther along we'll know all about it. You know, farther along we'll understand why. So cheer up, my brother, start living in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when He comes from His home in the sky, then we shall meet Him in that bright mansion, and we'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. You know, farther along we'll understand why. So cheer up, my brother, start living in the sunshine. We'll understand it, yes, all by and by.